on the
Yeah.
first issue of Cope, uh, what's it's not that impressive. Oh, it hallucinates. I find that when I talk to people, they're rather less impressed with it until they use it, and then they're like, "Oh," like ChatGPT, the latest
Yeah.
iteration, for example. Uh, but yes, there are still people who maintain it's not that impressive. So you actually present empirical data that it is impressive.
Yeah. So these chat bots, as they're known, occasionally make up things out, just fabricate things out of thin air.
Right.
You'll ask them about the legal basis for a decision, and then they'll make up a case from 1978 that never actually
Right.
existed. That's um, fairly problematic if you're trying to do a serious legal analysis. You don't want to rely on fake
I
cases.
I
You'd like
should
to the greatest extent possible to rely on real
yes.
cases.
I should note that my wife asked chat I think it was ChatGPT uh whom I had married, and it literally invented somebody. So and it had a story
You
about this person.
shouldn't second guess these chatbots.
Yeah, so the hallucinations they're sort of funny.
Yeah,
Often they're like fragments of reality sort of put together in a weird
yeah,
way. But yes, so sometimes they hallucinate. But we actually have empirical data on
yeah.
how
So
impressive these artificial intelligence chatbots are, and you forward some. So can you just tell us
so
like
I just did a trawl of the recent literature. This literature comprises studies in which academics have
a troll,
basically
not a troll?
basically pitted ChatGPT or some similar AI, Claude or Gemini or one of the
Right.
others, against humans in some task. And many of them found that the AI either matches or exceeds human performance, even in quite difficult, challenging tasks. So, for example, there's one study which is now probably out of date, used a superseded AI, l submitted AI written answers to an online course at a major reputable British university in psychology, and found that the overwhelming majority, 95% of the AI written answers were undetected by the examiners, and that they were awarded higher grades than the student written answers. That's fairly eerie. There was another study, for example, that had AI review detailed legal contracts and then compared its performance to lawyers from the US and New Zealand, and found that the AI accuracy was comparable to that of the best human lawyers, but that it did the task much faster and more cheaply.
Right.
So not only is it as good as you, it's quicker
It doesn't need
and
food.
cheaper. Yeah, it doesn't need to go to the bathroom.
Doesn't complain.
It doesn't have to take a 30-minute break to deal with a personal crisis.
Right.
There was another study where they asked AI to write poetry and then had non-expert humans read the AI written poetry and compare it to human written poetry, although of course the participants were not told which was which. And they found that the humans rated the AI written poetry as better. Now, maybe an expert, an English literature professor would be able to tell the difference and would see the obvious flaws in this imitation of Keats or Wordsworth, but the non-experts were unable to do so.
Yeah, I was gonna assert that that merely evinces the poor taste of the average person.
Yeah, and
But,
and,
but
and precisely why we need English literature
experts.
professors to tell them
Right.
how how poor their taste is.
I mean, I have had the Chat GPT, for example, and I don't know if Claude or Gemini might be more poetic, but the poetry is pretty impressive, but I would say it is lacking something yet.
Yeah,
But I'm not confident that it will lack that for too long.
yeah. Then there was another study which I hadn't included because it wasn't published by the time I wrote my article, which compared ethical advice given by AI chatbots to ethical advice given in this very popular New York Times ethicist column written by an academic philosopher, and found that, again, people judged the AI written advice to be more valuable than the advice that came from the expert human. Then if we go to domains like mathematics and coding, I think it's even more impressive. I'm not really qualified to speak about this in detail, but my understanding is that there's this model called O3 from OpenAI, which is the firm run by Sam Altman, was able to solve about a quarter of the so-called frontier math problems. These are math problems that were devised, I think, with the goal of benchmarking AIs, assessing their
Hmm.
capabilities.
Right.
And a legendary mathematician named Terence Tao had stated when this set of problems was devised that they were extremely difficult and that they would and that the problem set as a whole would resist AI for several years, and then only a couple of months later, a quarter of them
Yes.
had been completed by this O3 model. And likewise, this model was given coding tasks to do, and it achieved a professional coding score at the 99th percentile of human coders. So, and according to a recent video clip, Altman claims the latest model they're developing is even better than that one on
Right.
coding. So it'll be the best coder in the world according to this Code Forces metric.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the alarming things about this is how rapid the rate of progress is. So anything we say, like a month later, it's already antiquated,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, which is interesting in the context of academic publishing, because for listeners that aren't academics, academic publishing is notoriously slow,
Yes.
and it can take, sometimes more than a year between the time you submit your paper and the
Right.
time it is published. And a year in AI is a lifetime. Um,
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that. The dilatory process of publishing is like that itself is antiquated now. I mean, it's just like, yeah, by the time the article gets through peer review, it's probably not even worth reading anymore.
yeah, I mean, they will have developed a system that renders the
Right.
conclusions of that paper
Yes.
uh,
Yeah,
no longer useful.
right.
But most of the papers I cited had been uploaded to preprint archives, which are not peer reviewed. So,
Right.
eventually, in a few years, once they're no longer relevant, they'll appear in journals, I guess.
But it seems safe to say that everything you just cited, all of the references to the impressive performance of AI, it will be even more impressive a month from now, 5 months from now. I mean, there's no reason to expect this to, I mean, maybe you asymptote, you hit some sort of level of performance beyond which any gain is incredibly arduous, but that's not clear right now.
Well, it's certainly unlikely to go backward. Um,
Right. Yes.
but yeah, again, I'm not a expert on the technical aspects of AI. I don't think you
Sure.
are either.
No.
My understanding is that there are some skeptics in the field that believe that
Yes.
um, substantial further improvements in AI performance will require disproportionately and prohibitively large increases in the so-called scaling factors, i.e., the amount of computer processors
Right.
and the amount of data needed to train the model. And these skeptics would also argue that we're kind of at the limit of human data available for training AIs. We're going to now have to start using so-called synthetic data generated by the AIs,
By
and this could
right.
have adverse, deleterious effects because you're training on the output of the model.
Like model collapse, I guess they call
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
I'm not
So
I'm not qualified to comment
I'm not
on
either. Yeah.
those arguments, but
Right.
there are obviously other people in the field
Right.
who who dismiss the skeptics or at least believe they're overstating the problem.